Welcome to the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation's Meet the Scientist monthly webinar series. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein, BBRF's President and CEO, and your host. Today, Dr. Dawn Velligan will present When Medicine is Not Enough for Schizophrenia and Psychosis. BBRF is the world's largest private funder of mental health research grants, supporting transformative discoveries in order to develop improved treatments, cures, and methods of prevention. The high quality of the research we fund is made possible by the BBRF Scientific Council. This group of 183 prominent mental health researchers reviews each grant application and selects the most promising ideas with the greatest potential to lead to breakthroughs. The Scientific Council guides the foundation to fund creative and impactful basic, translational, and clinical research relevant to the whole spectrum of mental health. One reason that research funded by BBRF has such great impact is because we do not limit ourselves to one illness or condition. Since 1987, the foundation has awarded more than $430 million to fund more than 6,200 research grants around the world and across a broad spectrum of illnesses, including addiction, ADHD, anxiety, autism, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, depression, eating disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress, schizophrenia, as well as suicide prevention. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Dawn Velligan. Dr. Velligan is Director of the Division of Community Recovery Research and Training and Chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. She was a BBRF 2016 Distinguished Investigator, a 2002 Independent Investigator, and a 1997 Young Investigator. Our webinar will begin with Dr. Velligan's presentation, which will then be followed by Q&A. To submit your questions, please use the Questions tab on the control panel on your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time. Following the presentation, I'll ask as many questions as possible in the time allotted. And now, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Velligan. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I really appreciate this honor of being able to speak today. And I'm really excited to share some, treatments that were developed in part with funding from this organization, but also many investigators have looked at these issues. And so I'm going to present when medicine is not enough, what is it that we can do? What are the evidence-based approaches that we can use to fill those gaps? First of all, I want to share my potential conflicts of interest. I work as a consultant, speaker, and member of advisory boards for a number of pharmaceutical companies. And yet, medication is not always enough. So we're going to talk about the experiences of individuals who have psychosis, what the role of medication is, and then some of the psychosocial treatments that have been found to be effective for different types of symptoms that are experienced by people with psychosis. So first of all, if we look at schizophrenia, schizophrenia is really a constellation of multiple signs and symptoms, and these signs and symptoms are related in various ways to outcomes that people have in the community. So first of all, you have the positive symptoms, which we're most familiar with, right? Delusions, believing things that other people don't understand, hallucinations in multiple sensory modalities, hearing voices, seeing things, and disorganized speech and behavior. Now, these are the symptoms that medications primarily address, and they don't always address them fully, but medications are designed to really target these symptoms. We don't have such good medication choices for some of the other things. So for negative symptoms, which I'm going to be talking about, the affective blunting, poverty of speech and movement, trouble with motivation. We don't have medicines for cognitive difficulties at this point in schizophrenia, things like attention, memory, executive functions, and social cognitions. And then there are comorbid conditions such as mood, substance use, and anxiety that all need to be addressed. And all of these things impact how people get along in the community, how they work and go to school, the kinds of interpersonal relationships they can have, their self-care and their independent living skills, and whether or not they are going to follow through with medication. So I wanted to start with what the role is of medication. So this is an artist rendering. This is not specific data from a specific study, but it's a number of studies grouped together that show kind of the same curve. Don't pay too much attention to the timeline on the bottom, but pay attention to the curves. When people use antipsychotics, they survive longer in the community without a relapse than when they discontinue those medications or they're on placebo. And the curves look remarkably similar from a variety of studies. You do better on average if you're taking antipsychotics if you have a psychotic disorder. And that's been shown over and over. So what's the problem then? Well, only half of the medications that are prescribed are ever taken. And that's true in all forms of medicine. And the Surgeon General has even said that follow through on medication is America's other drug problem. So we spend lots of money. People get prescriptions filled a lot. And I go to their homes and there's just medicines everywhere that haven't been taken. That represents a lot of time, a lot of money. And it's not helping us figure out what the best regimen is because we don't know what people are taking. We also know that if you don't have medicine available to you, antipsychotic medication, for 11 days, that's doubling the risk of hospitalization in schizophrenia. And on average, individuals with this illness have 8 to 9 relapses in a 5-year period. That is not something that we would casually accept in any condition. Like, think about heart disease. This is not something you would say is an outcome that we're very proud of. And this is something that we really need to address. Medication follow-through is arguably one of the most modifiable obstacles to clinical stability and relapse prevention. And so it's something that we often target in our psychosocial treatments and our education. Unfortunately, though, the picture isn't all rosy for medication because medications have side effects and they're often intolerable. I get prescribed stuff all the time. I take it a couple times and I go, wow, I don't really want to take that anymore. So medication also, it often treats positive symptoms incompletely. So if we're promising people your auditory hallucinations, your tactile hallucinations are going to go away, but the medicine doesn't do that for them, we're going to have a problem. We've communicated to them in a very ineffective way. Sometimes the medicine doesn't take everything away. It might quiet things down. It might make the hallucinations occur less often, but sometimes it doesn't take them away. Medication also does not address many of the other symptom types, things like negative symptoms and cognitive problems. So for many years, CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, has been an evidence-based practice for persistent positive symptoms. We know that many individuals take their antipsychotics but continue to experience delusions or hallucinations, and that those symptoms can be very distressing for the individual and they can cause trouble with everyday functioning. For example, if you believe that, you know, people want to harm you on the bus, you're not going to take the bus, you're not going to get to your appointments or your social activities. So it's important to reduce those persistent symptoms and the distress that goes along with them, especially the symptoms that are interfering with people's ability to function in the world. For some people, they can hear voices and go to work, and they can hear voices and do many things. But for other people, it's very difficult to function. So CBT is really focused on helping the person to come up with these alternate explanations for their symptoms. So they've sort of settled on an explanation, but there may be alternatives that they haven't looked at. And in that way, we can reduce the impact of those symptoms on their behavior. We also want to focus on changing their underlying beliefs, their views about themselves and others. So to give you some context, we know that CBT really took off in this country in terms of the treatment of depression, right? But Aaron Beck, who developed CBT, actually started using this with someone with psychosis. And just like in depression, we know that people can have a certain view of their future. So if you're depressed, you have a negative view of yourself, you have a negative view of other people, you have a negative view of the future, and you see the world through that distorted point of view. And any event that happens, you're going to interpret it consistent with that view. So if you get an A on the test, it was an easy test. It wasn't because you have any ability. You know, and if you fail a test, well, obviously, because you're stupid. And so that's the kind of thing that when we have depression, we do to ourselves, right? And this is true for people with psychosis as well. They develop a worldview in their growing up that's going to predispose them to certain kinds of psychosis when the psychosis becomes manifest in their life. So my husband grew up in a very poor community and people beat him up for his lunch money. And, you know, he has a certain view of humanity. And if he were to be psychotic, he would be paranoid. And there's no question in my mind. He wants to always protect himself. He sits with his back to the door. He has developed these behaviors because he doesn't trust the world. And I think that this is sort of a normal process that goes on in all of us. And then what we do is we tend to interpret what we see, what we hear in light of those pre-existing models, and we weigh all confirmatory evidence more heavily. So we're very biased to prove our own beliefs and theories. So the first thing we do in CBT is we try to normalize the experiences that people have. First of all, everybody believes something that other people don't. Just take a look at politics right now. You know, you can go on Facebook and you can see all kinds of ideas and you just go, oh my goodness, how could they think that? And there's people on the other side going, oh my goodness, how could they not think that? So this is a pretty normal phenomenon. Now, according to a 2006 Gallup poll, 75% of individuals in the US believe in one or more of the following things, which is extrasensory perception, supernatural powers, ghosts, clairvoyance, and astronomy. Now, the people who believe in witches think the people who believe in astronomy, you know, are wrong. So it's not necessarily that they believe in all of these. And we often do not understand the views of people that we interact with. It's also true that many famous people have heard voices. And you can see up on the very top, the woman there, her name's Ellen Sachs. She's a professor of law at University of Southern California, and she has schizophrenia. And she's published books, and she's been very successful. The person next to her is obviously one of the Beach Boys. You have Anthony Hopkins on the bottom. He says that he hears voices, and he's a very famous actor, and he can function. Sigmund Freud heard voices, Winston Churchill, Joan of Arc. These are all people who we looked up to and who we believe, you know, did great things. And so you can do pretty great things even if you have some of these symptoms or you hear voices. And so it's important for people to keep that in mind, that their life is not over because they're having these experiences. If you hear voices, there's an organization called voicehearers.org, and they actually have this poster that I give out to people that I see, and the poster has skills for coping with auditory hallucinations on it. And there's really two basic strategies, but they've, you know, kind of divided that up into 100 different things you can try. The basic strategies are really distracting yourself. So wearing earphones that play music that compete with the voices, getting away from things, going on a picnic, running or doing exercise. And then the other method is focusing. You focus on the voices, you listen to them, you negotiate with them. I have somebody that I see now who was an MD, and he hears voices, and he actually negotiates with them. Well, I'll make you human if you do this or that. And he knows they're auditory hallucinations because he's a medical doctor, and he understands that they're part of an illness. And yet the negotiation seems to work for him. it gets them quieter and they stop bothering him as much. So we encourage people to try a variety of approaches to deal with that distress. Now, addressing distressing or problematic beliefs is also an issue. Individuals are used to having to defend their ideas. They're used to being patronized. They've been told for years that, oh, you know, nobody's trying to hurt you, get over it. So confronting individuals causes them to have greater conviction in these beliefs. Just try to pick someone from a political party that you don't agree with and try to convince them of your ideas. And what you'll see is they become much more entrenched. They're much more likely to defend their ideas. And every time they say it and defend their ideas, it becomes stronger and stronger. And it grows into, you know, very little room for hearing anything. So it's equally important, though, not to agree with these statements. So we don't say things like, yeah, I saw the FBI following you too. That's not good either. We want to find a fine line in the middle where we're choosing our words very carefully, and we're really attempting to understand. And, you know, it's kind of confusing. Why would the FBI want to follow you 24/7? You know, what's so important? What's so special about you that would make that happen? You know, I'm confused about that. Do they do this to everyone? Are you sure it's the FBI? Could it be, you know, the local police? We're trying to just sort of expand the thinking here. We also want to investigate, you know, evidence. How much does it really cost to surveil someone 24 hours? How big of a team do you need? What kind of devices do you need? Because that's a lot of money. And when people realize sort of what it takes, sometimes they begin to have a teeny bit of doubt. So this is a pie chart. I drew this with an individual during COVID. We had our sessions outside and we used sidewalk chalk. We of course got rid of it afterwards, but we drew how convinced she was that there was a spell being placed on her. Anytime somebody coughed or sneezed, it meant that there was some kind of conspiracy against her, and it was some kind of form of communication. So when she sat in her classes and people sniffled, or they coughed, or they cleared their throat, she believed they were communicating in this conspiracy and placing some kind of a spell on her. Now, what's interesting about this is we drew the circle and she said, well, I'm 90% convinced. Maybe there's 10% that could be something else, but almost every time someone does that, it's a conspiracy. So then we approached it from the opposite direction, and the opposite direction is really, what are all the reasons that people sniffle or cough or sneeze or clear their throat? And so she came up with a bunch of things like, you know, people might be smokers, or they might have a cold, or they might have allergies, or they might have caught something in their throat. And so now we draw the circle again and say, well, we'll draw how big the pie is for, you know, people who have colds, and how big is the pie for people who have allergies. And over time, you know, there's not that much left for conspiracy at the end, but there's always, you know, some room left for conspiracy. But now, instead of the whole pie virtually being a conspiracy, we're starting to say, you know, maybe there's other reasons these phenomena happen. So one of the things people do when they're afraid is they engage in safety behaviors. And so when they take the bus and they're afraid everyone on the bus wants to kill them, they don't look at anybody on the bus. They look down, they keep their head down until they're stopped. They briefly look up to see where they are. They get off the bus. So that kind of behavior reinforces the idea that people on the bus want to kill you, because you're not getting any data. So we ride the bus together and we look up, right? We look at people and we see these two ladies in the back, you know, they don't look too threatening. Think, you know, one of them's, you know, kind of elderly. I could probably take her. You know, it's okay. They're kind of smiling. Those people might be all right. And these guys up front, you know, they have a little bit more of a threatening look, perhaps. And maybe some people on the bus, you know, aren't as okay, and we have to be more careful with them. But what we can learn from this is that at least some people on the bus are okay. And I think that's important, because then you start crossing people off the list. And that's what Tim Ehrenbach did, at the very beginning of his career when he was working with someone paranoid, eventually they started crossing people off the list of who was involved. So this is a meta-analysis done by Till Wykes in the UK, looking at the CBT studies for psychosis that have been done. And this was data from 19 studies, and the effect size was, in the medium range, that most of the studies achieved at least a small effect size, and 32% achieved a moderate effect size. So is CBT for everybody? Maybe not, but maybe certain CBT techniques can help each person a little bit. And so it's really what techniques you choose to use and how you go about it. But there's more to psychosis, schizophrenia than positive symptoms. There's cognition, there's being motivated, and there's functioning in the community, and there's this move toward recovery. So first of all, focusing on cognition, if you look at the neuropsychological profile for individuals with schizophrenia, and this has been proven over and over again, these are very old data, and you have a profile mean for controls, and 0 is their score because it's a Z-score. And way down, a couple of standard deviations below the mean, is the average for individuals who have schizophrenia. Now, does this mean that everybody with schizophrenia has a below average score on cognitive testing? No, of course not. Ellen Sachs, who I mentioned earlier, she's a professor of law at USC. Her IQ is about 3 times what mine is, but it would be higher if she didn't have schizophrenia, and we know that. So no matter how intelligent you are, you lose some of what you would have had if you didn't have the illness. So there are certain specific cognitive difficulties that people have. They have trouble paying attention to things that require effort over time. Sometimes they have trouble directing their attention to what's important when there's distraction. So my favorite test is where you hear a male voice in one ear and it's giving you information, and you hear a female voice in the other ear giving you information. And I tell you, only pay attention to the female voice, which is what I tell my husband all the time. And you have trouble screening out the other voice. So you have trouble directing attention. Memory can also be, there can be also difficulties in memory. So things like being able to remember faces or procedures or information. Information processing speed is slower, and this is one of the best predictors of whether somebody's going to have competitive employment. Executive functions are also often lower than somebody who is an age-matched individual who doesn't have this illness. And that means that they have trouble planning and using judgment and carrying out goal-directed activity. What we know about these impairments is that they're usually stable over time for most of people's, adult life, that there might be an initial loss when somebody has their first episode, but that, most people don't deteriorate cognitively over time. There may be a subset of people who do, just like there's a subset of people who get early dementia. But in general, people are pretty stable in their cognition over most of their adult life, with certain faculties, declining then with age. We also know, though, that some of these cognitive problems are present well before the onset of psychosis. So before people start to hear voices or to believe unusual ideas, they, as a group, might get lower grades in English and math in the 4th grade. They, as a group, get worse scores on Army entrance exams. So in countries where they keep really good records and they have large populations, you can see that there's some issue with cognitive functioning prior to the onset of the symptoms that come later. But you can't pick out specific individuals that are going to have trouble. It's just in large groups we can kind of detect this as a neurodevelopmental illness. There are also difficulties in what we call social cognition, and these are our abilities to perceive, interpret, and respond to other people in the world. Social cognition actually mediates the relationship between, these memory, attention, processing speed things, and functional outcomes in the social realm. So if you can't make good guesses about the emotional states of other people, if you can't understand facial expression and voice tone well, or you're not paying attention to the right cues there, that can cause problems in social relationships. So what we know is that these cognitive difficulties predict how people are going to function in the world, how they're doing, socially and at work, how they're doing in their independent living. And so there are definitely different ways to intervene in cognition. And one of the ways is to directly target cognitive problems, directly target attention and memory and the ability to plan. And you can do that with cognitive practice. So with drill and practice, either on a computer or using pen and paper, you can improve people's cognitive functioning. This hasn't been well integrated into clinical treatment overall, but it works best if it's part of a multimodal program. So there are a number of programs that look at how to improve cognition in the context of vocational either rehabilitation or programs. What they find is that people in cognitive remediation tend to work longer hours and make more money than people who didn't get cognitive remediation. So there are real world effects of this. But what you're expecting here is that those cognitive gains are going to generalize into the real world in terms of your functional outcomes. A long time ago, I was perhaps less optimistic than I am now. And I said, wow, changing the brain, that's really hard. I can't do that. What I can do, though, is I can figure out ways to get around things. I'm really good at getting around things. So let's figure out, how do we bypass these difficulties and make people's lives better? So we developed cognitive adaptation training. This was developed at UT many years ago, decades ago. And we're still using this today to help people to stay out of the hospital, to develop good social relationships and good community relationships. We know that executive function, attention, memory, and psychomotor problems are going to predict how people do in the world. But we can break that by using CAT, by using compensatory strategies. It's very much like how people wear glasses. We don't fix their eyes, but now they can, play sports and drive and do things they can't do without the glasses. So CAT relies on what are called automatic processes. Most of what we do every day is automatic. If we paid attention to absolutely everything, it would be impossible and we wouldn't get anything done. So if the feel of our clothes on our body or our watch or some, air conditioner humming in the background, if all of that was all equally important and paid attention to, we couldn't last. So most of what we do relies on automatic processes. So environmental cues get us ready to act. Have you ever been in an elevator and the door opens and you walk out, but you're not on the right floor? I do it all the time. But that's because the cue is the door opening and a bunch of people getting off. And often when we're not thinking or we're distracted, we follow the cues in the environment. Cues are easier to follow than they are to resist. Just try to resist it when that text noise goes off and you're driving, right? You have to, because driving isn't safe when you're distracted, but it's very hard. You have to actively resist checking your phone because cues are easier to follow than resist. Cues also increase that experience of fluency. They make behavior feel easy to do. Your phone rings, you answer it. It's familiar, it's true. We reorganize belongings with people, in their apartments to decrease the number of steps that it requires to do things. That increases that experience that this is easy. This is easy to do. I can do this. Repetition with verbal and visual cues also increases familiarity. So if you get if you have a voice alarm and it tells you it's 2 o'clock, it's time to take my medicine. I want to take this medicine because I want to take better care of my dog. And that happens every day at 2. It starts to have that sense of truth. It's repeated over and over again. And we see this in the media, right? There's things repeated over and over again, and they sound true after a while. And so we use that to our advantage in CAP. It's also true that if you repeat the same behavior over and over again at the same time every day, it starts to become automatic. And so if every day at 2 o'clock that thing goes off and I take my medicine, I start to develop a habit to take medication at the same time every day. So this is an example of someone's home, and I don't mean this to shame anybody, because if anybody knows me, my room has often looked like this. And I even had police come one time when I was in college to answer an alarm that the dog set off. And they came in my room and they said, this room's definitely been ransacked. So I know what it's like to live like this. But can you imagine trying to get ready for a doctor's appointment when you open a drawer and there's SSI papers and potato chips and underwear? Every time you have to look for something to put on and do another behavior, you know, there's a chance that it's going to take forever. Now, if you go to the doctor and you actually go get your prescription filled and you go pick up your prescription, you've jumped through multiple hoops, and then you put your prescription on the dresser, chances are you may not even see it, or you might put the hat on top of it, or it might fall somewhere because there's so much. And so we really look at how people's environment's set up. Are things set up safely? Are they set up for that fluency, that ease of use? This is why, you know, now that I like have a teeny bit of money, I hire people to come in and organize things, because it's really important to release your mind from all of those things that happen if you're not organized. So one of the things that we do for people who have a lot of apathy, they have trouble starting things, right? So they're laying in bed and they think, oh man, I got to get up. I got to walk all the way over there and get my clothes. I got to do this. I got to do that. And pretty soon it's too much. So we put this clothing rack at the foot of the bed. And the first thing that happens is people open their eyes and they say, you know, that Dr. Velligan, she's really a nag. She wants me to get dressed. And then on every hanger, there's a shirt, a pants, and underwear, and a socks. So I've cut a bunch of steps. Nobody has to go to a drawer, to a closet. They don't have to open different drawers for different clothing items. Everything is right there. And we've set this up together. And then you can set an alarm that says, you know, why I want to get dressed. I don't want my mom to yell at me anymore. I want to get a girlfriend. Whatever the person's recovery goal is, you can tie that to how important it is to get dressed. And I know we all kind of lost it a little bit during the pandemic. I had to cut my hair finally, because now that I have to wear clothes, I had to cut something out. But the idea is, again, making this a habit, making this something you do every day, making it automatic. Now, for people that have more disinhibition, like me, you may open a closet and you grab the first thing you see, or you may see the clothes you took off last night on the floor, and those are the first thing you would grab to put on. So by organizing clothes by the day of the week, you're much more able to have what you need in each container. So there's no cue to put on extra clothes or to wear clothes that are out of season or that don't fit or are not appropriate for the occasion. Now, for problems with memory and organization, we use, this is an old school picture, right? Big, huge calendar. It's a desk calendar, but we put it on the wall and we attach a Sharpie marker with yarn. If we don't attach a Sharpie marker, nothing ever gets written on this calendar. But we do this because a lot of people forget to check their phone. And if they can see it from across the room, they know that their next appointment is going to be in a day or two. We teach them how to check every day off, so they always know what day it is. I know that when I'm on vacation, even not when I'm on vacation, to be honest, I often don't know what the date is. And that's not good, because then you don't know what appointments you have that day. So it's really important to keep track, and this helps. A long time ago when I started doing this, I worked at a state hospital, and they would have people like go outside during certain hours, and they had to be back by 2:30. Well, guess what? None of them had a watch. So it's remarkable that any of them came back on time. So when we saw that, we gave people watches so that they would know what time it was and they could come back. We use a lot of alarms, a lot of voice alarms. that are recorded in the person's own voice, or sometimes, you know, they do a rap song or whatever they feel is going to get them motivated to do whatever behavior. So it's noon, I want to work out because, you know, of whatever reason they have. So medication is a big one. Did I take my medication today? So if you put a sign on your door, you will not be able to leave your house without taking your medication. And that will work for a while. Typically, you know, it works for a week for most of us, and then we don't see the sign anymore because it gets old, kind of like our husbands, and we just don't notice them anymore. And then, you know, it doesn't work anymore. But for individuals who have psychosis, a lot of times they don't habituate to things very easily. So the sign will work for a little bit longer, a week maybe, and then we can change the color. We can change the message, the wording. We can put the favorite Spurs basketball player up there. We can do whatever is going to capture that person's attention over and over. The other thing we do is we use a lot of these pill containers for people. For people who are more disinhibited and take more pills than they need, we'll pack them in separate days with the day of the week on them so that there's no cue to open extra things. I have people that tell me, Dr. Velligan, I know I'm supposed to take my medicine every night, but I was already in bed. It was all the way over in the kitchen, so I didn't take it last night. I can fix that. So we put bottles of water by the bed. We put the medicine for evening right by the bed so that all they have to do is reach over. Again, it's that decreasing number of steps, making things easier. We use a lot of checklists. People feel good when they check things off. Took my medicine, took a shower. You know, I felt pretty good like during the pandemic when I was keeping up. I actually wore makeup on my video calls for a while. I kind of tried to keep up with what I did because I felt better. We also use blank daily schedules. Tell me how you spend your day. So what did you do before you came here? What time did you get up? And people fill these out. And for people with negative symptoms, this is really, you know, a visual aid, right? Because they see a lot of TV, a lot of smoking cigarettes, a lot of napping. Now, my husband believes that that's, of course, the ideal way to spend time. But many of us would like to see something more happening. And the truth is, if you spend, you know, Monday that way and Tuesday that way and all the week that way, some people say that's fine. That's what they want. But then if you don't do anything different this week, next week's going to be the same, and the week after that. And so is this how you want things to be next year or 5 years? Because the truth is that if we don't do something different today, there's not, you know, as much hope that things are going to change. So we try, and we're kind of a little bit pushy. Let's do this together. So we often do things and engage in activities to get people going and doing. Dental hygiene is an issue. It leads to other physical health problems. So we put the dental equipment right on the bathroom mirror. We attach it with a suction cup, and brushing teeth every day so that people are using their toothbrushes and toothpaste. I do home visits, and, you know, looking at people's homes, I had someone who kept their toothbrush and toothpaste in their bottom dresser drawer. And under those circumstances, it's really unlikely they're going to use it, right? So we move it out of there and we put it right there in the bathroom where they can see. Now, this is someone's house, and we had a few issues. Some of them are safety. You can see that things can fall into the open back of the toilet, especially a light. You wouldn't want that to happen. There's no room. So why are these people keeping all of their stuff out? Well, they do it because it reminds them to take care of it. It reminds them to clean. It reminds them to use their shaving cream. But after a while, trust me on this, because this is what I do. After a while, there's so much clutter that you can't do anything. So we try to organize things. We try to take things off of there. We try to help people to get more organized. And then we remind them where those things are by labeling the outside of the cupboard. So if we do cognitive adaptation training, we find pretty good things. So this is a study that randomized people to cognitive adaptation training. FarmCat, which was just CAT that focused only on taking medicine and making it to your doctor's appointments, and treatment as usual in the community. And what we found was that people were taking about 60% of their medication unless they were in CAT and farm CAT. Also, that red line there shows when we stopped making weekly home visits. And when we stopped making home visits, you can see that we created a habit and that behavior continued. Now, this is social and occupational functioning. So people are functioning at a much higher level when they have full CAT. So the full CAT program is really necessary to get a boost, right? Enough of a boost that it makes a difference in your social and occupational functioning. And you can see that without booster sessions, that kind of starts to move down after we stop coming to treatment. And so we need booster sessions, we need reminder sessions, and that's true for lots of things in life, right? We also find that people in farm CAT and CAT were able to stay out of the hospital for a longer period of time. They were able to not have a relapse than those without the treatment. So that's CAT, and it kind of is there to address a lot of the functional areas that we talked about. But what about these persistent negative symptoms? So negative symptoms are defined as they're defined as the absence or reduction of behaviors that are normally there. So you should normally have energy and move around and do things and be interested in the world and have, you know, happiness and sadness and pride and jealousy, and we should have full lives, right? What happens with negative symptoms, this doesn't occur. And they're negative because they're not there, whereas positive symptoms are a problem because they are there. So negative symptoms include things like anhedonia, difficulty feeling pleasure, and so you don't do pleasurable activities, you don't anticipate that they're going to be fun. People don't socialize as much, they don't engage with other people even though other people might be there. They might have a lack of initiation, they don't decide to do things, they don't plan things, they're not interested or persist in activities that are fun or social, or they don't persist at work activities. Their affect can be blunted, so they don't experience the full range of affect that people have. And they also have a blunted way of showing their affect. So their faces are more unchanging, their vocal expression more monotone, and they have less expressive gestures. And then elogia, this poverty of speech, they don't talk much, they don't elaborate spontaneously. So there's a lot of yes or no answers and not much elaboration. So this is sort of a model that we developed for the onset and maintenance of negative symptoms, that really there's neurodevelopmental issue, but there's also a protective issue. And we see this in a lot of early onset psychosis, that people shut down, they're overstimulated, they withdraw, and that's protective for them at the beginning of their psychosis. But that can lead to the development of negative symptoms. And so what that looks like is that they have limited initiation in things, their affect's restricted, they're withdrawn socially, they don't move or speak as much, right? But then that has consequences in the world. So if they don't initiate things, they're not exposed to situations that are likely to evoke emotion, right? They're not going to do things that make them sad, happy, you know, in pain. They're not going to do stuff. And so they don't have as many opportunities. They don't have as many activities or interests that they can discuss with others. So it affects how much others want to talk to them if they don't have things interesting that they're doing. There's also a lack of external positive reinforcement. They're not getting any goodies from the world because they've withdrawn from it. And they might lose skills that they used to have. If they were pretty decent conversationalists, without practice, you know, some of those skills can kind of weaken. And then they don't plan things for tomorrow. So tomorrow looks just like today. And then this becomes a maintenance loop. So then they have more, you know, restricted affect, more limited initiation, and that causes more of the same. And so this is really a feedback loop that continues. So we developed MOVE, and MOVE is a kitchen sink kind of approach. It's 5 components of treatment, and we stole from everyone. So I'm just saying, we stole from everyone. So we stole from cat. We use a lot of antecedent control, how to get people up, moving, doing, going on to the next thing. And I showed you what that was. We use this, this intervention for anticipatory pleasure, where we ask people to say, all right, how fun do you think it's going to be to go to the zoo? Right now, it's hotter than the surface of the sun, so we wouldn't do this now, but we would do this when it cools off. And, you know, they might say, I'd be okay. So then we go to the zoo, and we take a bunch of pictures, and we have a good time at the zoo, and they enjoyed the zoo at a 7 after. We have them re-rate it. So they're not going to anticipate the next time someone mentions the zoo that it might be that fun. But if we can show them that it was, and we can put that on their wall and they can remember, oh, hey, I should go to the zoo again, it's going to help them with anticipatory pleasure. Because this is something that research shows, you know, people have the capacity, when they have a psychotic illness, they have a capacity to enjoy things, but they don't anticipate it. And because of that, they don't plan things. And so this is to kind of take that problem with anticipatory pleasure and address it. There's also emotional processing and social cognition that are difficulties in negative symptoms. So we want to address those. People have trouble making good guesses. People lack reciprocity of their affect and their movement and their energy, and we want to teach them that. And so we do a lot of specific kinds of exercises. So we might get them to record their impressions. Wow, the zoo is great. So they can play that back and hear that affect. We teach them to ask other people, are you enjoying this? How are you feeling? And they can keep a card in their wallet, or they can have a text message that's automatic that pops up on their phone that reminds them to ask other people, hey, are you having fun? Or to even state things like, I'm having a good time, so that they're engaged. We have them do a lot of the training from SCIT, social cognition interaction training, where they're looking at certain parts of the face so they can identify when people are happy, sad, angry. And we have them practice things in front of a mirror and on a recorder so that they're more likely to show affect, they're more likely to show it in their voice, they're more likely to show it in their face. This is Mary Eddie Bill. This is from SCIT, developed by Roberts and Penn. And they use very simple heuristics to help people identify their own state of being and the state of being of other people. So you have my fault, Mary, everything's my fault, I'm a terrible person. You have blaming Bill, everything's your fault, you're terrible people. And easy Eddie, oh, that just happened, you know, and things happen. And which one are you, which one are they? And it helps them to understand attributional styles in a very easy and fun kind of group. So the fourth component is CBT. Now, Gumley and Beck and their associates did a study using CBT specifically for negative symptoms, and they focused a lot on the behavior like we do. But they also, you know, Eric Granholm and other people have done work showing that defeatist beliefs, this idea that I'm gonna stink at that, mediate that relationship between cognitive impairment and negative symptoms and their ability to function in a social environment. And so people have these negative appraisals of how they're going to do, people aren't going to like me, etc. And we can work with that in CBT. So the unhelpful thought, you know, this is Granholm's work, Eric Granholm. He had a very simple heuristic, and simple is better. Catch it, check it, change it. Catch it. They probably aren't going to like me. Oh, I really don't know what they think. You know, I really don't have any evidence that they don't like me. I don't know what they think. They're smiling. Maybe at least some people are okay with me. And then let me try my new skills and see how it goes. So you can take an unhelpful thought, look at the evidence, and then replace it with something that's more helpful. And then we use skill building approaches. So there's social skills training. You really have to kind of know a lot of different therapies to do this. There's social skills training. There's modeling. We do a lot of modeling. How do we cook healthy meals? How do we return a garment at a store when we're intimidated? We send text messages while people are interacting to remind them to smile at other people and do other activities. And then we look up a bunch of free things to do because money is a problem. People are poor often that have psychosis, and So we look up a bunch of free things to do, and you'd be surprised how many cool free things there are to do. So we did do a study, one that was funded by the Brain Behavior Research Foundation, and one that was founded by NIH on negative symptoms. And this is negative symptom scores, which you hope are going to go down with move and treatment as usual. We did get a moderate effect size. It's labor intensive. You got to know a lot of therapies to do it. And it's also difficult to recruit. Turns out people with a lot of negative symptoms don't like to volunteer too much for studies. And we're finding doing studies in the COVID messed everything up, but doing research on psychosocial treatment, even medication treatment, any kind of studies, it's harder now to get people to do the studies. People are overwhelmed and they can't do one more thing. So I want to encourage you and other people to understand that research is really important. And I know people are overwhelmed, but it's really important to be participating. So there's many other evidence-based interventions for psychosis. Peer-to-peer programs are awesome. We've used peers for lots of things. They have lived experience. They can share that experience and how they've, navigated the system, how they've overcome things in their own life. It can be very, very inspirational. The Clubhouse Model, where people come to the Clubhouse and they have jobs and they work and they make out their resumes, and very helpful. We have a great Clubhouse in San Antonio. Social skills training. I haven't really gone into formal social skills training, but that's a whole approach that helps people to do better when they're interacting with others. Intensive care management. We have a number of programs where we are working with people who are what are termed high utilizers, which means they go to the hospital a lot. And we work to keep them out using CAT, using CBT, using all of these things to get them to develop natural supports in the environment, to get them, hooked up with groups and churches and things that can kind of keep them out of the hospital. And it's very effective. Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, can also be effective to use these techniques with people that are overwhelmed by their voices. Or overwhelmed by some of the other things in their life that don't even have anything to do with having an illness, but lives are complicated. So all of these interventions provide us with hope for the future. We do want to increase the uptake of evidence-based interventions. They're not widely adopted a lot of times by agencies that see the greatest number of people with psychosis. We need to increase the first episode programs or recent onset programs to keep people working and in school to prevent disability. Most of the young people that I see now who are had a recent episode of psychosis, they're working still or going to school still. And keeping them in that life is the very best thing that we can do. We also need to ensure that these models are applied with fidelity, that it's not enough to train people. You really need to make sure they're doing what they're trained to do. It's easy to slip and kind of go through the motions and not be invested, and that's not going to do. And then we need to increase funding for mental health to ensure that these evidence-based programs are adopted alongside with the best, alongside the best medical treatments. So that is pretty much all that I wanted to share today. And I'm going to turn this back over and see if there are questions.
Well, let me first of all say thank you, Dawn, for the work that you've done. The presentation, I think, is extremely, extremely important for people with schizophrenia and other psychoses and their families to hear. So thank you for all that you're doing. And we received a number of questions. A few people asked about any suggestions in terms of the issue of denial or minimization of illness when a family member who has illness really minimizes their illness or need for treatment. What should their loved ones do?
Yeah, and I come across this a lot that, people want to forget. This is a very traumatic thing to have happen, to have a psychotic episode. People want to forget, it's never going to happen again, whatever. or they still have symptoms and there's nothing wrong with them. It's really a religious thing, or it's because, you know, an ex-girlfriend caused all these people to turn against me, and they really don't have much insight into the fact that this is an illness. And it's very difficult. And I will tell you, I'm a family member, so that I know what it's like and how hard it is. But I told my family to do this, and I tell families that, you know, if they can, that they're the ones, when people are young, they're the ones with the power. People live in their house, people eat their food, people use their money. That's when you have the power to do the most. And basically, you know, I tell them, you know, to set up house rules, which include going to the psychiatrist and the therapist, following the medical advice that's given, and working their homework on the therapy, and that those are rules for living in the house, that we need consent to make sure that that's happening. We don't need to know the particulars or the things that you know are really private. That's not what we're interested in, but that you're going. And then you know, rules about taking the medication if that's what doctors are recommending. I do have some people that I see that are not on medication, and part of my goal is to work with helping them learn some coping strategies, but also in time to see if they would accept a little bit of help from medication, because it can be easier to use these strategies when you have a little bit of medication. But, you know, if people don't take a very active approach early on, I go back 10 years later, and it's still the same situation. People are walking on eggshells. And the person who's the most ill in the home is the one that's running things. And, you know, it's not a good way to live for anybody. And the longer people go without medication, some studies tell us, the worse their outcomes physically and psychiatrically. And so, yeah, I play hardball when they're at the youngest. And when they're older, it's harder and you have less leverage, but there are certain things that can be done. It can be really reinforcing to every time you go get your injection to go out to a nice lunch, because that isn't something that you can afford very much when, you know, you're on government subsidy. So there's different things that you can do that are enjoyable, that are appropriate, that are helpful for people, that can encourage this. And we also have peer-to-peer, which is, you know, peers kind of saying, you know, this was my journey, and that can really help. Often in groups, people can hear the delusional comments of another person. Wow, that guy believes blah, blah, blah. And that can start to open cracks in their own delusional structure. So group is very, very powerful, and peers are very, very powerful for that reason.
All wonderful advice. One last question. For people who maybe don't live in San Antonio, people around the country, really around the world, with a loved one, and they want to get them engaged in this kind of wraparound treatment that really treats the whole person, helps the whole person. What's the best way to find that kind of treatment in different locations?
Yikes. So in Canada, they do it. In Finland, they do it. Some other countries of the world, you know, have really good programs, but it kind of depends. You have to advocate and you have to look for what's available. And unfortunately, in some areas, you have to pay for extras. We have really good programs here that I would encourage people to advocate with their MCO, their managed care organizations in the United States. We only get paid if we keep people out of the hospital. For every day we keep them out. And what that does is we can use that money flexibly to help them get engaged in things in the community, go to beading class. You know, so flexible pay structures can really help if they can advocate for some of that, that are really value-based. If we don't do what we say we're going to do, we don't get paid. And that can really change the face of treatment, I think. And we were kind of heading in that direction, and then things got changed a little with CMS, but CMS has been heading in that direction for a while. So that's one thing. And certainly you can talk to the universities there and see who works in mental health at the universities. And those would be the people who would most likely, be doing studies or have their finger on the best treatments.
Very good advice. And I think the important message is don't give up. There are things that could be done to help your loved one, and don't give up. Keep going for it.
Canada put out a family cat manual that they made for family members to use. So there are resources out there, and don't give up. Exactly like you're saying. Keep looking.
Well, Dawn, I want to again thank you for this extraordinary presentation, for the work that you're doing, which obviously is helping so many people. So thank you. I also want to thank everybody who joined us.
Thank you.
We are thrilled with being able to provide that support and the results that have come from that. I want to also thank people who joined us today. And I'd ask you to please consider making a donation to BBRF. 100% of every dollar donated for research is invested in our research grants. We're able to do this because our operating expenses are covered by separate foundation grants. This means that when you donate $1 for research, that dollar goes directly to the scientist. To make a gift, please visit our website, bbrfoundation.org, or call us at 1-800-829-8289. This webinar has been recorded. If you missed any portion of the presentation or would like to share it with friends or family, please visit the events and webinars page on our website. And please join us again next month on August 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, when Dr. Steve Ramirez, Assistant Professor of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Boston University, will present Manipulating Memories to Help Treat Brain Illness. Thank you, and remember, together we can dramatically improve the lives of those living with mental illness and enable more people to live full, happy, and productive lives. Stay well. Take care.